It's new cassette deck review time again, and this time we have the Marantz Professional PMD 300 CP. If you're looking for a new cassette deck, especially one that you can plug into your computer so you can convert your old tapes into digital files, this is one of the more affordable options on the market today. It's currently available on Amazon for $159. They call it a double deck cassette player, although it can also record with PC USB connection. The listed features are turn music on cassette tapes into MP3s, plug-and-play USB connection for Mac and PC, dual deck with high-speed dubbing, works with standard metal and chrome tapes. And as shown on the box, it includes optional rack mount ears and screws in case you want to put it in a rack mount installation. There have been numerous different models and brands of these decks, all based on the same basic design that have been around since the early 1990s. But over time, as the market for cassette decks declined, the internal components of these decks got cheapened out, a decision which I pleaded the manufacturer of these decks to reverse. And apparently they did see my video, and they actually listened to it, because I'm happy to report as of 2021, a few months after I posted that video, they switched to a higher quality supplier for the cassette mechanisms and motors used in this deck. So that's why I wanted to do a review of one of these, to see if it's a viable option for someone looking for a cassette deck at an affordable price, especially if they don't want to take a risk on a used vintage cassette deck, or if they lack the knowledge and skills to restore one. You get more peace of mind buying a brand new item that comes with a money-back guarantee and a warranty. That is, if it's any good. So let's find out. Inside the box you get the cassette deck and a package containing the rack mount ears, RCA audio cables, USB cable, and the manuals. And right away I can tell one other little improvement with this new version. The rubber feet on this are much more grippy than they were on previous versions of this deck, which tended to annoyingly slide around on you when you tried to push the buttons. With this one, that is no longer a problem. The feet are grippy enough that it's not going to slide around on you. Also, it has soft eject cassette doors, but unlike some previous ones which were annoyingly slow to open.
If I take it out, the first thing you notice is how slow this eject mechanism is on this machine. It's so slow. I mean, if you're in a rush doing things, you're going to get really, really frustrated.
This one is just about right. Not something important, but it shows a nice attention to detail. You get standard mechanical push-button tape transport controls. The left side deck is for playback only. The right side deck is for playback and recording. On the control panel in the middle, you get a digital tape counter for the right side deck with a reset button. An LED level meter for playback and recording of both decks. A noise reduction switch, although that is not Dolby noise reduction. I'll talk more about that later. A recording level adjustment, and buttons for playing chrome tapes, recording chrome tapes, dubbing, and high-speed dubbing. That's for copying one tape to another. The level meter is marked in increments from negative infinity, which just lights up whenever the deck is turned on, to plus 3 dB, and it looks like it has separate meters for the left and right channels, but they both show identical readings because it's showing left plus right. And this has caused some confusion because it makes some people believe that this is not a stereo cassette deck, when it actually is. It does record and play in stereo. It just only gives you a combined left and right channel indication on the level meter.
At the moment, I am directly between the front microphones, but I'm now moving over to the left front microphone. I am just starting a mechanical stopwatch which will move with me and help you in locating the sound as I walk between and around the microphones. No, this is not 60 minutes. And to further indicate our positions, no, this isn't a sex manual, I have my little zapper with its low distortion 1.5-inch speaker. I'm now moving across the front and am stopping at center front again. I should be heard now directly between your front speakers. Now we move across to extreme right, When we get to the pink noise tests, the sounds will be electronically panned to be only in each of the 4 locations: front center, left and right front, and center rear.
You also get another LED, which is difficult to see through the smoked plastic window, which lights up when you're recording. The cassette doors are easily removable for more convenient access to clean the heads or adjust the azimuth. And speaking of the heads, you get a stereo recording and playback head with AC bias recording and an electromagnetic erase head. The playback only deck on the left side has the same stereo head for playback and obviously no erase head because it does not record. It supports playing all 4 types of cassette tapes: Type 1 normal bias, Type 2 high bias, commonly known as chrome, even though most of them are actually a cobalt formulation, Type 3 ferrochrome, and Type 4 metal. For recording, it only supports Type 1 and Type 2, although that's not such a big deal because Type 3 tapes are very rare. They were only around for a couple years in the late 70s and early 80s, so you'll probably never come across one. And most people never use Type 4 metal tapes either because they were very expensive and they have not been made in at least 20 years. So you'll probably never come across one of these either. And if you're the kind of person who is rich enough to have a large collection of Type 4 metal tapes, you're probably not going to be in the market for a new entry-level cassette deck anyway. On the back you get standard RCA line level inputs and outputs for recording and playback. You get the USB output for connecting to your computer and a gain adjustment for it, which is very nice to have. It's something I wish the much more expensive TEAC and Tascam cassette decks had. And in case you're new to cassette decks and you're considering buying this as your very first one, I suggest you watch my Cassette Decks for Dummies video. But to answer one frequently asked question about cassette decks, no, they do not include built-in speakers, nor does this particular one have a headphone output. So you will need to use it with some kind of external sound system, either an amplifier, a receiver, powered speakers, something that will connect to this line level output and produce sound from it. But if you just want to use this to convert your old tapes into MP3 files, all you'll need is the included USB cable and some software on your computer. No extra hardware is required.
I tried to write it down, but I had to register. My piece of paper was not mine. And everything I thought I knew, everything I thought was meaningful, every friend I ever had was someone trying to sell me something.
It'll work with almost any PC or Mac made in the past 15 years, so if you have an old computer you're not using anymore, it'll be perfect for this. You just plug in the USB, and it will automatically install the drivers. There it found and installed 3 USB audio drivers, and it's ready to use. You just may want to go into your control panel or system settings and change the playback device back to your built-in audio, because they will switch it to the USB audio even though this cannot output audio from the computer to the cassette deck through USB. It's only for playback, not for recording. So you want to switch your playback back to your built-in speakers. You right-click on it and set as default device, and you can disable the USB output since it's not going to work anyway. Then under the recording settings, you'll see a new device here called Line USB audio device, and it set itself to the default device. But you may want to go into the properties and check that it's set to 2 channels, because I've seen some of these where you plug it in and it sets itself to 1 channel, which means you only get mono recording. So you want to make sure it's set to 2 channels, 16-bit, either CD quality or DVD quality. Now at this point you can download and install Audacity, which is a very popular program for recording and editing audio. You can find many tutorials about how to use it, but Marantz supplies their own software. You go to their website, marantzpro.com, you click on products, you go down to rack mount, and then you'll find the cassette deck here, PMD 300CP. Click on it. You go to downloads, and then you'll find their Easy Vinyl Tape Converter for Windows or Mac, and you can download and install it from there. And here it is, the Easy Vinyl Tape Converter. Begin by connecting your audio device to the computer, which we already have. And it has an option to split the recording into tracks automatically. So I have my cassette tape that I want to convert. I put it into the cassette deck. I press record on the software and then play on the cassette deck. That was just a short test to show how it works. And here it is in the My Music folder. And there's the file we recorded. It's a WAV file. And it sounds just the same as it was when I was playing from the cassette. So it's basic but functional software.
I found a little trouble, but I'll be alright. Never met a lady that I didn't like. Well, I'm a sucker for a smile and a sweet perfume. I think I see one coming from across the room. I take her honky-tonk until the sun comes up, kissing and a hugging in my pickup truck. I found a little trouble, but I'll be alright. Never met a lady that I didn't like.
Now let's pop off the lid and look at those improved internal components I was talking about. Because as I discussed in my Knockoff the Knockoffs video, the previous versions of these decks had switched from using genuine Tanishin mechanisms to no-name knockoff mechanisms. But one important thing I was not aware of at the time I made that video is that Tanishin had stopped production of cassette deck mechanisms, so in order to keep these cassette decks in production, they were forced to find alternative suppliers. And unfortunately, the suppliers they chose were far inferior. But thankfully that has now been rectified. Let's take a closer look. The mechanisms used in this deck are now made by CSG, the same company that makes the mechanisms used in the much more expensive TEAC and Tascam cassette decks. Although this is obviously not the same parts because this is a mechanical push-button mechanism, while the TEAC and Tascam decks use an electronically controlled full logic mechanism. It's good to see that they've switched from those no-name Tanishin knockoff mechanisms to these mechanisms made by CSG, which seems to be the highest quality supplier available today. It's difficult to see it from this angle, but the motors that these decks now use are made by TRW, and I looked at the part number and it's actually the same exact motor that are used in those TEAC and Tascam decks. So instead of using those counterfeit fake Mabuchi motors, they switched to these higher quality TRW motors. And the improvement in performance is striking, whereas the combination of the no-name knockoff mechanism and counterfeit Mabuchi motor yielded a wow and flutter rating of up to 0.5% peak or 0.26% WRMS. With the new CSG mechanisms and TRW motors, the wow and flutter is considerably reduced. Instead of just showing a few seconds of the test, I played the entire wow and flutter test tape and logged it into the computer so I can show it to you as a graph. And on the left side playback only deck, it was coming in a little bit above 0.1% WRMS and a bit above 0.2% peak. So it reduced the wow and flutter by more than half. And also the speed accuracy is pretty good. The tape has a 3000 Hz test tone on it and it was coming in at around 3010 Hz. That's within 0.5% of the correct speed. You would never notice that difference, and I wouldn't bother trying to adjust it because it's already so close to the correct speed. The right side playback and recording deck isn't quite as good, but it's still much better than before. It's around 0.13% WRMS wow and flutter and slightly above 0.25% peak. And likewise, the speed was pretty close to accurate. It's still within about 0.5% of the correct speed. Another feature which has been improved is the speed at which the auto stop engages. When you're rewinding or fast forwarding or playing or recording a tape and it reaches the end, it now stops almost immediately. This is good because it means that it's almost guaranteed not to eat a tape. If you're playing a cassette and for any reason the take-up reel stops, the auto stop will engage immediately to prevent any of the tape from getting spilled out and tangled in the mechanism. And if you're watching this a couple years down the road and you're considering picking up one of these secondhand and you want to make sure you get one of the updated components, you can check by looking at the serial number. In this case, 2203 means this one was made in March 2022. So look for a 21 or higher in this part of the serial number. And as for whether or not these improvements also apply to the other versions of this deck that are available, such as the Pyle PT649D, I would think so, since they're all coming out of the same factory in China, but I can't guarantee it. So if anyone watching this buys one of those other decks, please take a look inside and see if it matches what you see in this video, and then leave a comment, so that way I'll know and I'll update the description. Despite the improvements, there are still several reasons why this may not be the ideal cassette deck for you. First of all is this noise reduction feature, which as I mentioned is not Dolby noise reduction, because Dolby has not licensed their noise reduction system since 2014, so any new cassette deck made today cannot feature it. Marantz calls it dynamic noise reduction, which wouldn't be so bad because as I demonstrated in my review of the TEAC W1200, it is a pretty reasonable facsimile of Dolby B noise reduction for playback.
We've put together this demonstration that you can play on any equipment. But to get the most benefit from it, you'll need to switch to your Dolby B setting, position any equalizers or other processors flat or off, and set your tape bias selector to high.
But unfortunately on this one, despite what the manufacturer claims, it is not dynamic noise reduction. It is just a fixed low-pass filter, which does reduce the tape hiss on playback, but also reduces the treble response quite severely.
We've put together this demonstration that you can play on any equipment. But to get the most benefit from it, you'll need to switch to your Dolby B setting, position any equalizers or other processors flat or off, and set your tape bias selector to high.
And this is strictly for playback, it has no effect on recording. And speaking of recording, a major bugbear with this deck is that there is no recording monitor. Right now I have its input connected to my smartphone playing a YouTube video and its output connected to a pair of powered speakers, but you can't hear what I'm recording. Unless you have it connected to an amplifier or receiver with a tape monitor feature, it's only when you stop, rewind, and play back the tape that you can actually hear what it recorded.
Dark mineral grain texture, vinyl storm gray, Turkish brown texture vinyl iceberg white.
That may be why Marantz doesn't even advertise the recording feature of this deck, they just call it a cassette player. Also, there is some 50 or 60 Hz AC mains hum audible in the audio output of this deck, as well as some background hiss generated by the circuitry of this deck, which is noticeable when playing the clear leader portion of a tape, which should be silent. And despite that improved mechanism and motor, there is still some noticeable flutter with certain types of music, probably due to that lightweight plastic flywheel. So Vortex Industrial, if you're watching this, please consider upgrading these decks with a metal flywheel. Even the cheap little Sony CFD S70 boombox, which costs about half as much as this, has a metal flywheel, so it can't be a terribly expensive upgrade to make. And there are several other little quirks which may get on your nerves when you're using this deck. Sometimes when you put in a tape and go to close the door, it doesn't close easily. You can force it closed, but something is obviously not right by the way it's sticking out like that. That's because the reels are not lining up with the sprockets on the hubs here. I've never had this problem with any other deck I've owned, but just this one, sometimes you need to move this a little bit and then it will line up and let you close the door. And normally an advantage to a deck with basic push button controls is that as soon as you put in a tape and press play, it starts playing immediately. There's no waiting for the mechanism to engage. But with this one, there's actually a noticeable delay between when you push the play button and when the sound starts coming out of the output. Also, whatever you're doing with the left side deck takes priority over the right side deck. That's normal for playback because you can't hear both tapes at the same time, but with this one, you can't even rewind a tape on this side without cutting out the sound on this side, since it overrides anything you're doing on this side with the controls on this side. Although that's not a problem the other way around. You can play a tape on this side and rewind or fast forward a tape on this side and it won't interrupt the playback. Also, for some strange reason, whenever you push any of the buttons, it causes the meter to peg. The right side deck has a digital tape counter, which is nice, but it's only 3 digits, and that's not enough because after about 41.5 minutes of playing or recording a tape, it wraps around to 0. So you'll have to keep that in mind if you're using a 90-minute tape, which is 45 minutes per side. Before you get to the end of the tape, the counter is going to go back around to 0. As I hope my review has showed as objectively as possible, while these decks have been improved with their new internal components, they're still far from perfect. But they were never meant to impress the discerning audiophile. They were meant for the average consumer who just wants to play their old tapes again, which are probably not that high fidelity to begin with, and convert it into MP3 files, and for that purpose it's certainly good enough.
Okay, that was Ruba. Rumba.
Turn that organ off now.
He hit me.
Turn the organ off. Turn that off.
It doesn't make noise. But it doesn't make noise. I'm recording stuff. Somehow my mom got grouchy. Well, I'm walking over here. Tommy hit me.
And if you do start out with one of these decks and then upgrade to a higher quality vintage deck in the future, it's still worth keeping this around for one unadvertised feature it has, and that is it can be used to convert any line level audio source to digital on your computer. All you have to do is plug the USB output into your computer, and then your audio source into the play output jacks of the cassette deck. I know it seems counterintuitive to plug an input into an output jack, but the reason why this works is because the USB conversion chip in this cassette deck just taps onto the output jacks of this deck. So it doesn't matter whether the audio is coming internally from the cassette deck or externally from a device you plug into it. Either way, it's going to convert it to digital through the USB output. For example, I connected it to my turntable's preamp output, and now it's playing through the computer. And in other cassette equipment news, I'm happy to report that the Panasonic RX-D55 CD cassette boombox, which Techmoan did a video about, is once again in stock and available on Amazon for about $150. And Tascam has just reintroduced the CD-A580 CD player, MP3 recorder, and cassette recorder combo deck, which I did a video about. It had been out of production for about a year, but according to their press release, it will be coming back soon. So if you want to enjoy both CDs and cassettes, you will now have some decent options to choose from.